it just seems obvious and common sense to me, and I think to lots of other people, that to have places where the community can come to thrive and to get involved in positive activities and constructive activities, it can only do good. I've been working with young people for about 18 years. Started off working for a charity called Youth Advocate Programme, which worked with Wandsworth and Lambeth young people. Then I moved over, worked for Wandsworth Council for 12 years. Got quite frustrated at the way, the short-termism of the work with the young people that needed long-term support. And decided, alongside Mark Reigate, to sort of take a leap of faith and set up a charity, which kind of coincided with Mick Carney from Fitzroy Lodge passing away, and we kind of wanted to carry on his legacy, and so we decided to set up the charity, name it after him, which he probably would have hated. But yeah, to try and carry on the legacy that he had. And Mick was the first person who put me and Mark in contact with each other, and had always encouraged us to set up our own little project, which we did on a very small scale. But when he passed away, we thought we've got to try and do it on a bigger scale. And I mean, I knew Mick for probably about 12, 13 years before he passed away, whereas Mark knew him for a lot longer. And so what struck me I knew he was an impressive man because just having been around him, but when he passed away, I found out so much more about him, and he's just the impacts he's had on young people is massive, and the amount of young people he's supported is huge. Carney's Community Centre really represents a place where anyone can go to try and demonstrate positivities, get opportunities. So we're open to all. We target some of the most disadvantaged groups, but as I say, we're open to all. There's no exclusions. So we try and get as many different people from as many different backgrounds down here as possible. And we want to just try and really show young people and society what young people are capable of, and use sport and boxing in particular, but we also have a lot of long-term mentoring and key work and other projects that we use, but we find that boxing's a key kind of hook to engage them, and we also use the boxing as a way of employing them, because we train them up to become coaches and personal trainers, and then run a social enterprise where we charge members of the public to come in and use the gym, be coached by the trainers, so they can earn a bit of money out of it as well. So for us, we're not a competitive club, so our core aim, rather than creating competitive boxers, is to engage young people, and so we don't push people into going on and competing. We wait and see whether it's something that they want to do. So the journey tends to be, for those that do want to compete, is they'll come, they'll engage in the boxing sessions. We'll see that they've got potential. We'll push them to keep on training. We'll maybe give them a bit more of an individualised training session as well. So we'll get coaches that will come in and focus a bit more on them. And we'll have a sort of slow and steady plan of how to get them into an actual amateur boxing club where they can then go on and compete. And we tend to try and we link in with the amateur boxing clubs as well, so that they can train here sometimes, train at the amateur boxing club sometimes. And what we tend to find is, because we've invested in them, even if they do go on and start competing and training a lot more regularly at the competitive club, they'll often come back and volunteer and support here and act as kind of role models and people that can show, look, this is the journey I've been on. If you want to do it, this is how we can show you how to do it. For community centres like ours, we open the doors and it's free. No one has to pay to come in. For most boxing gyms, you do have to pay a subscription, but I don't imagine you'd be able to find a boxing gym out there which would turn away a young person who couldn't afford a subscription. So even when you're any old boxing club, they're not going to say, if you can't afford it, you can't come in. They'll encourage you to pay, but they won't force you to pay if you can't afford it, and they won't turn you away. But it's very difficult. You've got, and I think it's not just the funding. It's also you have all of the sort of postcode wars and things like that. So you've got people that don't want to go into other people's estates through fear because they think that something could potentially happen to them. What we've seen happen is, rather than having places like this and like boxing gyms in little estates all over the place, instead what the government seems to try to do is create these super centres, but they're just in one place, so you're only going to get a small group of people coming to them. What you need is places like this all over. You need places where people can go to, and unfortunately we don't. Well, we did have them, but they're all starting to fall apart and fall away. And I think we live in a really health and safety conscious society where it's frowned upon to demonstrate your macho-ness in a number of ways, and you're often stopped. I mean, things like you're not allowed to play British Bulldog anymore in the school playground because it breaches health and safety. And I think so to have the opportunity to come into a boxing gym where you can demonstrate aggression, you can demonstrate your strength, but you do it in a controlled manner, I think it's massive, and it releases a lot of tensions, and I think it ensures that people don't leave the gym and want to start using that aggression in another way. I think the one of the most common thing we hear from people that come and train with us, and not just with us, but anywhere, is that once you know how to box, and once you're able to look after yourself, that's the time that you stop getting in trouble and getting in fights out on the streets, because you've got that confidence, and also because you know where to go to if you've had a tough day and you want to let off some steam, you know, to come down and get onto the bags or to go and have a spar with someone. It gives you that opportunity. For a young man growing up in London, there's a number of different challenges that they're facing. I think there's a real breakdown in community. I'm a firm believer that it takes a village to raise a child, and actually the villages that we're living in are fractured and are broken, and you no longer have kind of extended families and extended communities, and so I think it's really difficult. I think they're growing up in a situation where they're kind of shown lots of negative images of young people. There's lots of negative talk about young people. Quite often I think they're growing up thinking there's the only route for them into success is either sports, crime or music, and that's it. And so it's difficult. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear around knife crime. There's a lot of fear around being able to get employment, being able to get a decent salary out of it. There's a real lack of social mobility as well, I think. So I think there's not that many opportunities for people who might be born into sort of a struggling family to be able to raise themselves up and become a huge success. And I think they see that there's real barriers there, and so what we want to try and do is break down those barriers and create opportunities. Too often we label people, and to label people gang members is very negative, and I think it's quite difficult for them to come out. I think there's definitely a racial element there. I think you're much more likely to be labelled as a gang member if you're black, and that's quite a sad thing that society does, because it's not giving people a fair opportunity. I think when it comes down to kind of youth crime and youth violence, for me, I don't think it's necessarily portrayed more by people from a certain colour. I think it's much more around class nowadays and backgrounds, and I think the society we're living in is so mixed when it comes to racial backgrounds now anyway. If they've been through some sort of trauma, if they've been assaulted, if they've been offended against, if they've been abused, that's where you see the problems. I mean, there's obviously we do a lot of work with teens. Kids in their teens, they're getting lots of hormonal changes, so they're going to be a bit more erratic, they're going to be a bit more unreasonable, so you will see that there's more problems there. But I think what we try and focus on is more so the times when we can have the most positive impact, and I think that's more around when people are ready for it, and in my experience they tend to be more ready for that when they start hitting early adulthood, so from the ages of about 18 up to 25. And unfortunately, when you look at services that come from like local authority and support services, everything tends to drop off by the age of 18. And I think that is because as a society, what we try and do is we try and support people and potentially change negative behaviour when we've decided that it's best for the person to change. And actually what we should be doing is waiting for that person to decide when they want to change, and then providing that support. And as I say, that tends, in my experience, it tends to be around the ages of 18 to 25, possibly up to 30. But the resources drop off massively once you hit the age of 18, which is unfortunate. So I think we need more places like this that can provide more support for them at an age when they're ready for that support, when they've got that teachable moment where they've decided, actually, do you know what, now's the time to change, now's the time to progress, now's the time to make something better of myself. It's all about listening to the individual. People would always say to me, so how do you get people out of a gang? And in my experience, the only way of getting them out of a gang is getting them into another gang, because they're part of a gang because they need to be, because they don't feel like they belong to anyone, because they don't feel like they have any support, because they don't feel they have any real true aim or purpose. And so what boxing gyms do is they provide that positive gang. You go there, you're a part of something. People look at boxing and think it's quite an individual sport, which it is, because once you're in the ring and you're competing, it's just you and your opponent. But there's a massive team element about it. You have one guy boxing, but you'll have the whole gym will be going down to support them. They'll be helping them with their training, and you get team sessions where you're competing against other teams, and it really is. I've never seen in any other sport, but it's a real family atmosphere. And I mean, my background is not boxing. My only involvement with boxing first came when I phoned up Fitzroy Lodge to find out, bringing a couple of young people I was working with down there. And the reason I think I've become so focused on it is I walked in and I just saw much better youth work being done by volunteers who weren't trained and who weren't employed to do youth work, but they were parenting, and they were looking after these young people, and the reason they did it is because someone did it for them when they were younger, and it kind of creates this virtuous cycle. And I think we live in a society where there's a lot of vicious cycles, where you've got this sort of revolving door of offending. You've got if you're growing up in poverty, the likelihood is that your children are going to grow up in poverty. If you're growing up in crime, the likelihood is your children are going to grow up in crime. And actually what the boxing gym does is it provides an alternative, and it provides an opportunity for people to see that you get what you put in. The reactions we see from parents who are sending their children down here, especially parents who've got children that are getting in trouble at school or might be getting in trouble out on the streets, and I don't mean necessarily crime, but could be getting detentions and things like that. Quite often they're used to telling off their kids because they're used to people contacting them to tell them their kids are misbehaving. And so when we've contacted them and we're showing them photos of what their kids are doing down here, and we're calling them up to say, oh, by the way, you know, so-and-so was down here today and he really looked out for this kid who's got a disability and supported him and showed him how to go. It kind of gives them a bit more faith, and I think it helps, encourages them to start seeing their children in a more positive light as well. I don't think they often get people telling them positive stuff about their children, and I think that's not even for just bad kids. I think in general people tend to complain about children, tend to criticise, tend to challenge, and actually quite often they're capable of doing some really positive things, and we need to highlight that and focus on that and focus on the strengths rather than focus on the negatives. In society today, we've got lots of people who are growing up in families where it's the people in their families are good people, but due to having to go out and work, and due to potential illnesses or things that they might have gone through in their past, they might not always be able to provide the greatest support for their children and for other family members. And in the same way as I was saying about it takes a village to raise a child, it's more important. You don't just need a mum. You don't just need a mum or a dad. You need a mum, you need a dad, you need an extended family, and you need a community. And that's what places like this provide. They provide that community. They provide that opportunity to feel supported, to feel a part of something, and to have an alternative person to go to. It could be that we've got someone who comes in, he's got a brilliant relationship with his mum, but he's fallen out with her for the day and wants to come and unload and tell you about it. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to be that extra support. So, as I say, for some people, they do come from really troubled backgrounds and troubled families, and for them, they might refer to us as their first family, but for others, we could be their second family, or we could be their extended family, we could be their third family, but we're something for them to be a part of, something that they can come to where they can feel safe, where they know they're surrounded by other sort of positive role models and people that can give them good advice. So what we try and do is with this centre, and I'm sure what other people do with their own centres as well, is we try and create opportunities for people to demonstrate a positive outcome and get involved in positive activities. So whether that's through training up, learning how to box, and then going out and competing in front of friends and families, or whether it's teaching them how to cook or helping them set up a business, it doesn't matter. It's whatever their interest is, we'll try and support them with it, but we will take a lot of lessons from boxing and we'll use it in very different ways. So even for the ones who come down and aren't necessarily interested in boxing, if you were to speak to them, they'd know a fair bit about boxing because we match it, or we compare life to a boxing match. And as I was saying earlier, you get wins and you get learns, not wins and losses, and it's the same in life in general. You could, if you've lost a job, you've got to learn from that situation and move on. If you've been arrested, you've got to learn from that situation and move on. If you've tried to start a business and it's failed, you learn from that situation and move on. And that's what we want to try and teach, is that it's resilience. And I think that's something that I think really, if there was one thing we could try and improve in society, I think it's increasing the resilience of young people.